My name is Chris Hall. I'm the president of AUK, and it's a real pleasure to welcome you here for the first of our history seminars this year. It's a great pleasure and it's a great honor to have Elizabeth Roberts, Lady Roberts, here visiting from Oxford. Lady Roberts, in the course of her own diplomatic career and her husband's diplomatic career, has lived in a great many places, but her interest in this region of the world came particularly into focus when she lived in Belgrade between 1996 and 1998, particularly interesting years professionally for diplomats, and particularly tough times to be in Belgrade. Is it 3 years ago now you published, 2 years ago you published 2007, your book on Montenegro in the realm of the Black Mountain, which has been widely praised and I think is the best work in English on the history of Montenegro. Lady Roberts is currently working towards a new book on the history of the Sanjak, but today she's agreed to talk to us on Montenegro and particularly on the problems of nationality and identity in the case study of Montenegro. She has agreed to take questions, and I hope after her talk we'll have an open discussion. And I look forward to it very much, and thank you for coming.
Well, thank you very much, Chris. And let me say that it is a great honor and a huge pleasure for me to be here. I'm absolutely delighted to be back somewhere I haven't been since 2001, when I was a OSCE election observer in the first parliamentary elections. So it's terrific to be back, and I'm astonished, I have to say, at the changes I've seen in my drive from the airport last night, which is obviously not very much. I am going to talk about Montenegro today because it's the part of the old Yugoslav jigsaw that I know best. I am going to work, as Chris said, on Sanjak. I should say I'm working in collaboration with a colleague from the University of Leicester, Kenneth Morrison, who's also worked on Montenegro. We'll be working together, or we are working together on the Sanjak area. I came to Montenegro, I think, it was really probably the drive from Kosovo over through the Rugova Valley and so on that made me realize I suppose, the spectacular beauty of Montenegro, and then I became interested and absorbed in its history. And I remember when I was talking to somebody there who said, an academic from Montenegro, and he said, "You're Australian?" I said, "Yes." He said, "And you're interested in Montenegro's history?" I said, "Well, I am, yeah, I am." He said, you, a lucky Australian, so much geography, so little history. Now, Australian Aborigines wouldn't agree with that, but, you know, there's a point. So today it's my great pleasure to talk to you about national identity and statehood, and looking at the complexity of Montenegrin identity. And I want to do that primarily by looking at some main historical milestones or developments that characterize Montenegrin history and are very make for what I would argue is an ambivalence that is often felt by Montenegrins about their essential identity, whether they are Serb or whether they're Montenegrins. I want to look at that question. I apologize in some ways that it's very Montenegrin focused, but it would be presumptuous of me to want to talk about Kosovo or Albanian experience when, you know, I know relatively little about the region. And I'm here much more in a learning mode than in a teaching mode. So with your goodwill, I will begin. And please interrupt me if you think that there's something that I haven't explained clearly or you don't understand. So I want to talk about identity. Well, it's become something of a cliche to speak of the Balkan region as constituting a religious and ethnic mosaic, and to understand by this ostensibly geographical term, the Balkans, a region characterized by ethnic and religious fragmentation, by turbulence and by a whole string of negative notions, violence, primitivism, even savagery. But in fact, as I'm sure most of you here know, Balkan was originally a Turkish word meaning wooded mountains, wooded hill, and it only began to be applied to this part of southeastern Europe, previously known as Turkey in Europe, in the 19th and 20th centuries, at a time when it also began to accrue many of the negative connotations mentioned above. Well, some of these cliches became less powerful in the 40 years of Titoism under the influence of Tito's ruthlessly applied brotherhood and unity, and the associated emphasis at that time on class division. Class became the operative prism through which to interpret any form of conflict. So while at that point in those 40 years, this view of the Balkans somewhat fell into obeisance, it became the brutal Yugoslav wars and Kosovo War of the 1990s breathed new life into this term Balkan and reactivated all the old derogatory cliches, and, often exploited very much in the media by journalists and others. Alongside this crude stereotyping of the Balkans as a cauldron of competing ethnicities, there emerged in the 1980s and from then onwards a much more serious and academic debate over the nature of nationalism. And this debate sought to study more systematically the rich variety of constituencies and phenomena associated with nations and nationhood. And I'm thinking here of the well-known and broadly focused books, which I'm sure many of you have encountered, books on nationalism by Benedict Anderson, by Hobsbawm and Ranger, Anthony Smith's Nationalism, Ernest Gellner, and also books with a narrower focus like Ivo Banitz's seminal The National Question in Yugoslavia. And then at the same time there was a plethora of books devoted suddenly to the individual histories of the different countries of the Yugoslav jigsaw. Books like Noel Malcolm's book on Bosnia and Kosovo, Tim Judah's books on the Serbs and on Kosovo. Then there were individuals' histories of Croatia, of Macedonia, and I suppose my own book on Montenegro falls into this category. Well, implicitly or explicitly, these books also raised issues of identity, focusing or highlighting to some degree issues of ethnicity, religion, language, the state and civil society, national myths and symbols, and highlighting the complex and competing claims of different national groups and the ways in which nation and nationhood were frequently used to justify claims to particular pieces of territory or to the monopolization of political and economic power. So into this rich and at times toxic mix, the case of Montenegro introduces an unusual paradigm. For here, and this is what I want to talk about today, the identity issue with the most political and social traction has not been between peoples of different ethnicity and religion, although those issues do exist in Montenegro. I don't want to wipe them away. But the really, as I said, the issue with the real social traction or political traction has been between people who share the same Orthodox religion and Slav ethnicity. And until very recently, the same Serbo-Croatian language, but now we're beginning to see people want to divide language in Montenegro. You have the Montenegrin language camp and the Serbian language camp. Now, Montenegro alone, this identity issue, the issue of whether Montenegrins define themselves as a unique nation, a Montenegrin nation, or whether they form an integral part of the larger Serbian corpus, has dominated political debate since the end of the 19th century. In other words, Orthodox Montenegrins, as many commentators and analysts have noted, are heirs to two competing national traditions, the one emphasizing their Serbness, Srpstvo, and the other their Montenegranness, or Srbostvo. And the competing claims of these two national traditions within Montenegro have in the recent past generated significant tensions, giving rise at times to conflict. And it is this dynamic which has been at the center of political conflicts throughout the 20th century And some people would even argue back as 1878, the time of the Congress in Berlin, the time when Montenegro obtained its international recognition under Congress of Berlin. So the question I want to look at is, why has this happened uniquely in Montenegro? And my argument is, I intend to focus on this by looking at history. It's not history exclusively, but I want to look at the way in which the development of Montenegrin statehood and national identity has been molded by key historical factors and events which have shaped a specifically Montenegrin national identity, which challenges the competing tradition that exists, the tradition of Serbness, formulated by one of Montenegro's best-known sons, Milovan, as Montenegros are quintessential Serbs. So I should sort of emphasize at this point that the debate over national identity that I'm outlining in Montenegro clearly concerns the Orthodox majority, and so the minorities, Bosniaks, Albanians, Croatian, Roma, who altogether make up some 26% of the total population of Montenegro, are not part of this. They're not subject to this ambulance, but of course they are subject to its political ramifications, and they have been subject to its political ramifications, and the way this issue has so tended to dominate the national debate in Montenegro, certainly since 1997, increasingly from 2003, and the degree to which it has distracted attention from other very important issues which need to have attention to issues like employment, and I'll come again to that a bit later. So the Orthodox population of Montenegro at the last census, 2003, made up 43, at that census of the 76% of people who were describing themselves as Orthodox, you had this division between those who described themselves as Serbs and those who described themselves as Montenegrins. The Montenegrins in the 2003 census, 43% of them declared themselves to be Montenegrin nationality and 31% Serb. Well, why is it that if Albanians define themselves as Albanians and Serbs as Serbs, Croats as Croats, and so on, why are Montenegrins alone prey to this fundamental ambivalence when it comes to issues of national identity? Well, Serbs and Montenegrins have much in common.